The officer slid the paper across the table and said the words that ended my old life. "Mr. Carter, your wife says you grabbed her by the throat in front of your daughter." I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. Because I never touched her. Not once, not ever. But she had bruises, she had tears. She had a story rehearsed so well it sounded true even to me for a second. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd had a nanny camera installed in our living room. And it had been recording the entire time. If you've ever been lied about by someone who swore they loved you, you already know this story is for you. Stick around, because what that camera caught wasn't just her plan to destroy me, it was so much worse than that. And by the end of this, she didn't just lose the case. She lost everything she actually cared about. Subscribe before we go any further, because karma in this story doesn't just visit once. It moves in and refuses to leave. The interrogation room was cold, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with the air conditioning. Detective Ruiz sat across from me with a yellow legal pad and a face that had clearly seen this script 100 times before. "Walk me through your night, Mr. Carter." "My night was normal," I said. "I came home from the site around 6. Melissa made dinner. We ate. Sophie did homework. I went to bed around 10. That's it." "That's not what your wife told the responding officers." "Then my wife lied." He didn't blink. He'd probably heard that 1,000 times too. "She has bruising on her upper arm and a scratch near her collarbone. She says you grabbed her during an argument about finances." I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. "We didn't argue about finances last night. We haven't argued about anything in weeks." That part was true, and it should have scared me more than it did at the time. Because when a marriage stops arguing, it's not because it healed. It's because one person already checked out and is just waiting for the right exit. 3 hours earlier, before any of this, I'd been standing in my own driveway watching 2 patrol cars pull up with their lights spinning silently. No siren, just that slow predatory crawl. Melissa was on the porch in a robe. Mascara smeared down her cheeks like she'd been crying for an hour. Except I'd seen her 20 minutes before that, completely dry-eyed, scrolling on her phone at the kitchen counter. "David did this," she told the first officer, pointing at her arm, her voice shaking just enough to sound real. "He grabbed me. He's done this before. He's done this before." 4 words that weren't true, said with the kind of conviction that makes neighbors peek through blinds and believe every syllable. Mrs. Patterson from next door was already outside in her bathrobe, arms crossed, staring at me like I was something she needed to scrub off her sidewalk. "David," she called out, "is everything okay over there?" I didn't answer. What was I supposed to say? That my wife of 9 years was standing on our porch accusing me of something that never happened, while our 7-year-old daughter sat in the upstairs window, watching her father get walked to a squad car in handcuffs? That image is the one that still wakes me up some nights. Sophie's face pressed against the glass, confused, scared, not understanding why Daddy was being put in the back of a police car while Mommy cried on the porch. I didn't resist. I didn't argue with the officers. I just kept saying the same thing over and over. I didn't touch her. "Check the cameras. We have cameras." Nobody was listening yet, but somebody would. The ride to the station happened in silence, the kind where you can hear your own pulse in your ears. The officer driving didn't say much, just glanced at me twice in the rearview mirror like he was trying to read whether I was dangerous or just devastated. At the station, they took my belt, my wallet, my wedding ring, sealed in a plastic bag with my name scrawled on it in black marker. They took my fingerprints. They took a photo of my face that I will never, ever forget, because in it, I look exactly like a man whose entire world just collapsed in real time. A booking officer asked me my height, my weight, whether I had any tattoos, whether I'd never been arrested before. "No," I said. "Never." He didn't even look up. Everybody says that the first time. I wanted to scream that this wasn't the first time because there was no first time. That none of this was real. That somewhere in a recording device in my own living room there was already proof I hadn't done what they thought I'd done. But you don't get to argue with a booking process. You just get processed like a number, like a statistic. While somewhere across town, the woman who put you there was probably already calling her boyfriend to tell him it worked. Let me back up, because to understand how we got to that driveway, you need to understand who Melissa really was behind closed doors, and who was standing right beside her the whole time, smiling at my dinner table like family. His name was Mark Doyle. Mark and I had been best friends since 10th grade. We built a construction company together from nothing, Carter and Doyle Construction. Our names literally bolted to the side of every truck we owned. He was my best man at my wedding. He was Sophie's godfather. He was, as far as I knew, the one person on this earth who had my back no matter what. About a year before that night in the driveway, things at home started shifting in small, quiet ways that I told myself were nothing. Melissa stopped asking about my day. She started taking calls in the bathroom with the fan running. She'd come home from girls' nights, smelling like a cologne that wasn't mine. I noticed. I just didn't want to see it. There's a difference. You've been distant, I told her one night in March, trying to keep my voice gentle, the way you talk to someone you're afraid of losing. I'm just tired, David. Running a house and a kid and trying to have a life of my own is exhausting. I'm not asking you to explain your whole existence. I'm asking what changed. Nothing changed, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Everything's fine. People only say everything's fine when nothing is. 2 weeks after that conversation, I found a receipt in her jacket pocket while grabbing my keys. A charge from a boutique hotel 40 minutes outside the city. Dated for a weekend, she told me she'd spent at her sister's house helping plan a baby shower. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was for a surprise, maybe a gift for me, maybe nothing at all. Looking back, that's the part that embarrasses me most. Not that I missed the signs, but that some part of me saw them clearly and chose comfort over confrontation, because confronting it meant admitting my marriage might already be over, and I wasn't ready to lose Sophie's family the way I'd known it. I even asked her about the hotel, carefully, gently, the way you tiptoe around a question you're terrified of the answer to. Oh, that, she said, barely missing a beat. Work conference for the boutique. Boring stuff. You'd have hated it. I believed her. Or maybe I just needed to. What I didn't know yet was that Mark had quietly become the majority signer on 2 of our business accounts after I'd handed him more operational control during a brutal 6-month stretch, when my father was dying of cancer and I was splitting time between job sites and hospice. I trusted him with the business because I trusted him with my life. That trust was about to become the most expensive mistake I ever made. This is where the story takes its first real turn, the one that changes everything you think you understand about who the real villain is. About 5 weeks before the fake assault call, I was going through old footage from the nanny camera, the one we'd installed in the living room after we hired a part-time nanny named Carla to help with Sophie after school. It wasn't there to spy on Melissa. It was there because Carla was new, and like any parent, I wanted eyes on my kid when I wasn't home. Melissa knew about that camera. What she didn't know was that the system also had a secondary unit tucked into the bookshelf in my home office. The one I used for client video calls, the one I'd forgotten to mention because, frankly, it had never mattered before. That little camera had a wide enough angle to catch part of the hallway, including the doorway to the office where Melissa thought she had complete privacy. I was looking for a clip of Sophie's piano recital that Carla had filmed for me when I stumbled onto a folder time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. I almost didn't open it. I wish sometimes I hadn't. But I did. And there she was, sitting on the edge of my desk, laughing into her phone with a voice I hadn't heard her use with me in over a year. He has no idea, she said, giggling. David thinks everything's fine. God, this is almost too easy. Mark's voice came through on speaker, casual, confident, like a man who already believed he'd won. Just stick to the plan. Once the divorce filing drops, his lawyer's going to be too busy untangling the business accounts to even think about custody. By the time he realizes what's missing, we'll already be married. We'll already be married. I sat in that office chair and felt something in my chest physically cave in. Married. They were planning a wedding while still living under my roof, eating my dinners, tucking my daughter into bed. But it got worse because 2 minutes later in that same recording, Melissa said something that turned my shock into something colder. What about the prenup? If I file for abuse, doesn't that void it automatically in our state? That's the beauty of it, Mark said. Domestic violence findings can override a lot of prenup protections in custody and spousal support. We just need something on record, a 911 call, a police report. Doesn't even need to stick in court, it just needs to exist. It just needs to exist. That was the moment I understood this wasn't a marriage falling apart. This was a plan. People only say everything's fine when nothing is. 2 weeks after that conversation, I found a receipt in her jacket pocket while grabbing my keys. A charge from a boutique hotel 40 minutes outside the city. Dated for a weekend, she told me she'd spent at her sister's house helping plan a baby shower. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was for a surprise, maybe a gift for me, maybe nothing at all. Looking back, that's the part that embarrasses me most. Not that I missed the signs, but that some part of me saw them clearly and chose comfort over confrontation, because confronting it meant admitting my marriage might already be over, and I wasn't ready to lose Sophie's family the way I'd known it. I even asked her about the hotel, carefully, gently, the way you tiptoe around a question you're terrified of the answer to. "Oh, that," she said, barely missing a beat. "Work conference for the boutique. Boring stuff. You'd have hated it." I believed her. Or maybe I just needed to. What I didn't know yet was that Mark had quietly become the majority signer on 2 of our business accounts after I'd handed him more operational control during a brutal 6-month stretch, when my father was dying of cancer and I was splitting time between job sites and hospice. I trusted him with the business because I trusted him with my life. That trust was about to become the most expensive mistake I ever made. This is where the story takes its first real turn, the one that changes everything you think you understand about who the real villain is. About 5 weeks before the fake assault call, I was going through old footage from the nanny camera, the one we'd installed in the living room after we hired a part-time nanny named Carla to help with Sophie after school. It wasn't there to spy on Melissa. It was there because Carla was new, and like any parent, I wanted eyes on my kid when I wasn't home. Melissa knew about that camera. What she didn't know was that the system also had a secondary unit tucked into the bookshelf in my home office. The one I used for client video calls, the one I'd forgotten to mention because, frankly, it had never mattered before. That little camera had a wide enough angle to catch part of the hallway, including the doorway to the office where Melissa thought she had complete privacy. I was looking for a clip of Sophie's piano recital that Carla had filmed for me when I stumbled onto a folder time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. I almost didn't open it. I wish sometimes I hadn't. But I did. And there she was, sitting on the edge of my desk, laughing into her phone with a voice I hadn't heard her use with me in over a year. "He has no idea," she said, giggling. "David thinks everything's fine. God, this is almost too easy." Mark's voice came through on speaker, casual, confident, like a man who already believed he'd won. "Just stick to the plan. Once the divorce filing drops, his lawyer's going to be too busy untangling the business accounts to even think about custody. By the time he realizes what's missing, we'll already be married." We'll already be married. I sat in that office chair and felt something in my chest physically cave in. Married. They were planning a wedding while still living under my roof, eating my dinners, tucking my daughter into bed. But it got worse because 2 minutes later in that same recording, Melissa said something that turned my shock into something colder. "What about the prenup? If I file for abuse, doesn't that void it automatically in our state?" "That's the beauty of it," Mark said. "Domestic violence findings can override a lot of prenup protections in custody and spousal support. We just need something on record, a 911 call, a police report. Doesn't even need to stick in court, it just needs to exist. It just needs to exist." That was the moment I understood this wasn't a marriage falling apart. This was a plan. A cold, calculated, rehearsed plan, built by 2 people who had decided my reputation, my daughter, and my company were simply assets to be redistributed. And the worst part, the part that still makes my hands curl into fists when I think about it, is that Mark wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He'd been quietly moving money. Small transfers at first, equipment reserves, and subcontractor advances that didn't match any actual subcontractors, all routed through an account he controlled because of the access I'd given him during my father's illness. Almost $60,000 had disappeared over 8 months. 2 clips later, dated almost a month after the first, I found out exactly where some of that money had gone. Mark mentioned a deposit on a lake house condo near Sandusky, somewhere he called our little reset after all this blows over. And Melissa laughed and said something about already picking out furniture from a catalog on her phone. They'd been planning a literal getaway funded by money stolen from the company I'd spent 15 years building with my own 2 hands. The same hands that had laid the foundation of the office building where Mark sat signing those transfers. There was a third clip too shorter, almost an afterthought, where Melissa asked what would happen to Sophie if custody dragged out. Mark's answer made my blood run cold. "Kids, adjust." She barely remembered the version of her dad who didn't go to prison. Go to prison. He said it like it was already decided, like my daughter's image of her own father was something they got to script and edit at their leisure. My best friend and my wife weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were robbing me, methodically, while planning to frame me for violence I never committed so they could walk away clean, wealthy, and married. I sat there for almost an hour just staring at the paused video, Melissa's laughing face frozen on the screen. And here's the thing nobody tells you about discovering a betrayal this big. You don't feel rage first. You feel stupid. You replay every dinner, every bedtime story, every "I love you" muttered half asleep, and you wonder how many of them were real and how many were just lines in a play you didn't know you were performing in. I didn't confront her that night. I know that surprises some of you. Every instinct in me wanted to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to call Mark and ask him to his face how many years of friendship he was willing to torch for an affair and a business heist. But rage is exactly what they wanted. Rage looks like instability in a courtroom. Rage gets you arrested in your own driveway, which, as you now know, is exactly what happened 3 weeks later when Melissa decided to speed up her own timeline. So instead, I closed the laptop, backed up that footage to 4 separate places, and went to bed next to a woman who was already planning her exit, and mine, all while pretending nothing in our house had changed. That's the lowest I've ever felt in my entire life, lying in that bed. Not the night of the arrest. That night. Because the arrest was humiliating, but at least by then I had power. That night in March, I had nothing but knowledge and silence felt like drowning slowly with the lights on. Word travels fast in a town like ours, faster than truth ever can. By the time I was released on bail, half our friend group already had an opinion, and most of them weren't on my side. Our mutual friend Greg texted me exactly once. Stay away from my family until this is sorted, like I was something contagious. Melissa's sister posted a vague, tearful message online about standing with survivors that somehow racked up 200 likes before noon, none of those people knowing they were cheering for a lie. My own mother called me crying, not because she believed I'd done it, but because she was terrified other people did. At work, 2 subcontractors quietly stopped returning my calls, a silence that spoke louder than any accusation ever could. I started eating lunch alone in my truck because I couldn't stomach the sympathetic, doubting looks in the break room. I lost 11 pounds in 3 weeks without trying. Sleep became something I negotiated with rather than something I actually got. The worst nights weren't even about the case. They were about Sophie, about the supervised visit where she asked, in that small, careful voice kids use when they sense something's wrong, "Daddy, are you in trouble?" I told her no, sweetheart. Daddy's just going through some grown-up stuff. And then I went home and sat in the dark for an hour because I didn't trust myself to drive yet. There were nights during those weeks where I genuinely didn't recognize my own reflection. This hollow-eyed stranger staring back at me from the bathroom mirror at 2 in the morning. Wondering how a man who'd never raised a hand to anyone in his life had somehow become the villain in his own daughter's story. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters. Grief and humiliation like that don't just sit in your chest, they hollow you out from the inside. And if you've ever been falsely accused of something that strikes at the core of who you are, you know exactly the kind of numbness I mean. What pulled me through wasn't anger. It was Sophie's face in that upstairs window and the simple, stubborn promise I made myself that she was not going to grow up believing her father was the kind of man capable of what he was being accused of. The morning after my arrest, I sat in a holding cell for 6 hours before my one phone call went through. I didn't call a lawyer first. I called my sister Rachel, the only person I trusted enough to say out loud what I'd found. "David, oh my God, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Listen to me carefully, I don't have much time. I need you to go to the house when Melissa's at work and grab the external hard drive labeled Taxes 2019 from the bottom drawer of my office desk. It's not taxes. Don't tell anyone you have it, not even your husband." "David, what is going on? I'll explain everything. Just trust me." She did. Rachel and I haven't always been close, especially after Dad passed and the estate stuff got complicated. But in that moment, she didn't ask why. She didn't lecture me, she just said, "Okay," and hung up to go do exactly what I needed. That's the kind of love you don't appreciate until the people who were supposed to love you the same way turn out to be auditioning for an exit instead. I think about that phone call more than almost anything else from those weeks, because it reminded me that not everyone in my life was a performance. That hard drive held every backup of that nanny cam footage, downloaded the moment I found it, because some part of me, even in shock, knew I might need proof one day that I just never imagined I'd need this fast. When I finally got out on bail that afternoon, paid for by my sister because my joint accounts had mysteriously been drained down to almost nothing 2 days earlier, I went straight to a divorce and criminal defense attorney named Diane Reyes, a woman who came recommended by my old college roommate who'd gone through his own ugly split. Diane had a reputation for being unshakable, the kind of lawyer who didn't flinch at messy cases because, as she put it during our first meeting, messy is where the truth usually hides. "Mr. Carter, before you say anything else, I need you to understand something," she said, sliding a notepad toward herself. If your wife's accusation holds up even loosely, you could lose custody, lose access to your accounts through a protective order, and potentially face charges that follow you for the rest of your life. This moves fast unless we move faster. I have something, I said. I have footage. I watched her entire posture change the second I said the word footage. Show me. I played her the clip, all of it. The laughter, the plan, the line about the prenup, the line about the missing money. Diane didn't say anything for almost a full minute after it ended. Then she looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as quiet, focused hunger, the look of someone who just realized the case she thought was a disaster was actually a gift. David, she said, this isn't just a custody case anymore. This is a filing of a false police report. This is potential fraud. This is possibly embezzlement depending on what we find in those business accounts. And depending on jurisdiction, this could be a felony for her, not a misdemeanor. What do? We do nothing. Not yet. We build, quietly. You go home, you act exactly the way you've been acting, which I'm guessing is calm and confused because that's exactly how an innocent man behaves. You let her and Mark believe they're winning. Meanwhile, I subpoena every financial record tied to your business and your joint accounts. And we get a certified forensic analyst to verify the footage's metadata, so nobody can claim it was edited or staged. That last part mattered more than I realized at the time. The other side's entire defense strategy, once they realized what we had, was going to be claiming the video was doctored. Diane made sure that door was locked before they even tried to open it. Diane brought in Patrice the same week, and together, they built a timeline so airtight it would have made a defense attorney weep, cross-referencing every transfer date from the business accounts against text messages, calendar invites, and even gas station receipts near that lake house condo in Sandusky. Patrice spent 4 days quietly pulling property records and found the condo deposit listed under an LLC Mark had set up using his mother's maiden name. A detail so sloppy it almost felt like he wanted to get caught, except greed rarely thinks that far ahead. Diane also had me sit down with our state's specific statutes on false reporting and prenuptial enforcement, walking me through, line by line, exactly how a credible domestic violence finding could have voided protections in my prenup, and exactly how thoroughly that plan would collapse the moment the footage hit a judge's desk. They built their entire strategy on you never finding out, she told me one evening over coffee that had long since gone cold. Which means our entire strategy just needs to make sure you found out at the worst possible time for them. We didn't rush. We didn't leak anything. We let the false narrative breathe just long enough for Melissa and Mark to get comfortable, confident, careless, because confident people make mistakes and careless people leave trails. Patrice also pulled 6 months of text records through a court order, which on its own wouldn't have meant much, except it confirmed the exact timeline from the videos almost word for word. Location pings near that hotel 40 minutes outside the city. Late-night messages timed suspiciously close to nights. Melissa told me she was working late at the boutique. Diane built what she called a belt and suspenders case, meaning even if a judge somehow doubted the footage, the financial trail alone would have been enough to unravel the custody and asset claims on its own. Juries and judges love corroboration, she told me. One piece of damning evidence can feel like a fluke. 5 pieces all pointing the same direction stop feeling like a fluke and start feeling like a pattern. About a week into this quiet build, Mark called me out of nowhere, his voice doing that easy, casual thing it always did when he wanted something. Hey man, just checking on you. Heard things have been rough. You know I'm here if you need to talk, right? I almost laughed out loud. Here he was, the man who'd been embezzling from our company and sleeping with my wife, offering me a shoulder to cry on like nothing had happened. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice as flat and ordinary as I could manage. It's been a lot. Appreciate you checking in. Anything you need, seriously? We've been through too much together for this to come between us. Too much together. He had no idea how right he was, or how soon all of it was about to come crashing down on exactly the person who'd built it. I hung up that call and sat in my truck for 10 minutes. Just breathing, because some performances take more out of you than the people watching ever realize. For the next 10 days, I went back to a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. Slept in the guest room because of the temporary distance the protective order technically required, and watched Melissa walk around with this smug, satisfied calm that honestly should have been an Oscar-worthy performance if it weren't aimed at destroying my life. She'd already met with a divorce attorney of her own, a guy named Brent Sokol who specialized, ironically, In domestic violence-adjacent settlements, the kind of lawyer who smells blood the second a police report exists. I knew this because Diane's investigator, a sharp, quiet woman named Patrice, had been tracking the public court filings the moment Melissa's attorney submitted the initial paperwork. Melissa was asking for the house, 70% of our joint savings, full custody of Sophie, and a restraining order that would have kept me from even attending my own daughter's school events. Mark, meanwhile, had filed paperwork of his own, a request to formally buy out my shares of Carter and Doyle Construction at what he called fair market value, conveniently timed for right after my expected arrest record would tank my standing with our biggest commercial clients. They weren't just trying to ruin my marriage. They were trying to legally erase me from my own company while I was distracted defending myself against a crime I never committed. That's the kind of thing that should make you furious. It did make me furious. But Diane kept reminding me of one phrase that became something like a mantra during those weeks. Cold hands win cases, hot hands lose them. So I kept my hands cold. I showed up to every required meeting. I answered every question through my attorney. I picked Sophie up for our scheduled, supervised visits and made sure every single one of them was documented, on time, calm, loving, completely uneventful. Because nothing destroys a fake abuse narrative faster than a father who behaves exactly like a man with nothing to hide. And every single one of those visits, I held my daughter a little tighter than usual. Because some nights I genuinely didn't know if I'd get to keep doing that. 2 days before the emergency hearing, Brent Sokol filed a motion to suppress, arguing the footage had been obtained without Melissa's knowledge or consent inside what he called a reasonable expectation of privacy, in our shared home office. For about 6 hours, I genuinely thought it might work, that some legal technicality might bury the one piece of truth standing between me and losing my daughter. Diane didn't even flinch. Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings made in a home you co-own, David. He knows that. He's stalling, hoping we panic before the hearing. She filed a response by that evening, citing the exact statute, attaching the forensic chain of custody report, and requesting sanctions against opposing counsel for what she called a frivolous delay tactic. The judge denied the motion to suppress the next morning without even scheduling a separate hearing for it. I remember reading that one-line denial order and feeling my hands shake for the first time in weeks, not from fear, but from something dangerously close to hope. The forensic analysis on the footage came back clean 2 weeks later, untampered. Original metadata intact. Time-stamped weeks before the false assault claim, which meant it couldn't be dismissed as something I'd fabricated after the fact for revenge. Diane requested an emergency hearing, citing new evidence directly relevant to both the protective order and the custody arrangement. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet and stronger coffee than I'd had in weeks. I remember Melissa walking in wearing a soft blue blazer, the kind of color stylists pick to look gentle and harmless in front of a judge. Mark wasn't allowed inside the courtroom since he wasn't a party to the divorce filing yet, but he was there in the hallway, arms crossed, clearly expecting to celebrate something within the hour. He had no idea what was about to happen. Melissa's attorney went first, painting a picture of a controlling husband, a man who'd grabbed his wife in anger during a financial dispute. A man whose business stress had apparently turned into domestic violence. The judge listened, neutral, unreadable. Then Diane stood up. Your Honor, before we proceed further, I'd like to submit time-stamped, forensically verified video evidence directly relevant to the credibility of the petitioner's claims. Melissa's face shifted, just slightly, the first real crack I'd seen in weeks. The judge nodded for the footage to be played. And there it was, on a courtroom screen, Melissa's voice, clear and unmistakable, laughing about how easy this would be, talking about voiding the prenup, talking about marrying Mark the moment the dust settled, talking about money moved out of business accounts that weren't hers to touch. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. Brent Sokol, her own attorney, actually put his hand over his mouth for a second. The universal lawyer expression for my client just torched her own case in real time. Melissa's face went white, then red. Then she started shaking her head like if she just denied it hard enough, the recording would somehow stop existing. That's taken out of context. That doesn't prove anything happened that night specifically. Mrs. Carter, the judge said, her voice flat and final. This court takes false reporting and the misuse of protective orders extremely seriously. I'm dismissing the protective order against Mr. Carter effective immediately. And I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges related to false reporting. I didn't smile. I want to tell you I felt triumphant in that exact second, but mostly I just felt this enormous, quiet exhale, like I'd been holding my breath for 6 straight weeks and finally remembered how lungs work. Behind me in the gallery, Melissa's own mother sat frozen, her hand pressed over her mouth. Having flown in from Tennessee the week before, fully convinced she was supporting a daughter who'd survived abuse. I watched her face crumble in real time as the recording played. Watched her realize the daughter she'd defended on a tense phone call with our own neighbors had been lying to her too. She didn't look at Melissa once on the way out of that courtroom. By that evening, word had already spread through the same small-town circles that had once turned against me so easily. Except now the story flipping was its own kind of justice. The same group chats and the same vague, tearful posts quietly deleted within hours, replaced by an awkward collective silence nobody wanted to be the first to break. Greg, the friend who told me to stay away from his family, called me 3 days later, stammering through an apology I accepted but didn't fully forget. Outside the courtroom, Mark was waiting with a coffee in his hand and a grin that hadn't gotten the memo yet. How'd it go? Is it over? Melissa walked past him without a word, tears streaming down her face, and that's when Mark realized something had gone very, very wrong. He turned to look at me, and for the first time in 20 years of friendship, I watched real, unguarded fear cross his face. David, whatever you think you know. I don't think anything, Mark. I have the recording. I have the bank transfers. I have everything. David, come on, we've been friends since we were kids. We can talk about this. You should have remembered that before you tried to steal my company and frame me for assault. I walked past him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. That was, without question, one of the most satisfying walks of my entire life. The criminal review moved fast once the DA's office got involved. Partly because filing a false police report tied to domestic violence claims is something prosecutors take seriously when the evidence is this clean. And partly because once Melissa's financial records were pulled during discovery, investigators found the same suspicious transfers Diane had already flagged from the business accounts, except now with criminal exposure attached for both Melissa and Mark. Mark was formally removed as a signer on every Carter and Doyle account within the week. A clause Diane had quietly triggered using a partnership agreement provision most people forget exists until they desperately need it. The one that allows immediate removal of a managing partner under credible evidence of financial misconduct. He lost access before he even finished hiring his own attorney. Our biggest commercial client, a regional retail chain we'd worked with for 6 years, caught wind of the embezzlement allegations through the inevitable small-town grapevine and quietly pulled their contract renewal, choosing instead to wait and see how things settled, which translated to roughly $400,000 in projected revenue evaporating from Mark's side of the business almost overnight, since I was the one who'd personally maintained that client relationship for years while he handled internals. Melissa ended up pleading to a reduced charge after months of legal back and forth, avoiding significant jail time but accepting a permanent record for filing a false report, a hefty restitution order tied to the missing business funds she'd benefited from indirectly, and the complete collapse of the settlement she'd originally demanded. Instead of 70% of our savings and full custody, she walked away with a small fraction of the original ask and supervised visitation, because the court, understandably, was no longer interested in trusting her unsupervised judgment with our daughter. Mark was charged separately for the financial misconduct, facing his own restitution requirements that effectively wiped out the very lifestyle he and Melissa had been planning to build together on my dime. The wedding they'd been so confident about never happened. Funny how quickly love evaporates when the bank accounts do too. I bought out what remained of Mark's stake in the company for pennies on the dollar as part of the legal settlement, rebranding the business under just my name within the year, Carter Construction, clean, simple, mine. The business actually grew within the year, ironically, because clients respect a man who handles betrayal with paperwork instead of a public meltdown, and word of that quiet, methodical resolve traveled just as fast as the original rumors once had. I hired a financial controller, an actual outside firm this time, because I'd learned the hard way that trust without verification isn't trust at all, it's just an open invitation. Sophie is 7 going on 8 now, and some nights when I tuck her in, she asks why mommy doesn't live with us anymore, and I give her the gentle, age-appropriate version of the truth, that sometimes grown-ups make really big mistakes, and mistakes have consequences, and that no matter what happens between adults, she is loved completely, and that will never, ever change. People ask me sometimes if I regret installing that camera like it was some invasion of privacy I should feel guilty about. I don't. I installed it to protect my daughter from a stranger. It ended up protecting all three of us from someone far more dangerous than any stranger could have been, two people I trusted with my whole heart. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that the people who hurt you the worst are rarely strangers, and the truth doesn't need you to scream for it. It just needs time, patience, and somewhere quiet to be recorded, waiting for the exact right moment to speak louder than every lie ever told about you. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. And don't forget to subscribe because the next story might just be the karma moment you've been waiting for all week.